Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Mindful Muslim podcast. On this episode, I will be speaking to Brother Mostafa, who is from Liverpool. He shares with us his childhood trauma. We talk about marriage and he gives us lots of advice on marriage. Assalamu alaikum, Mustafa. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mindful Muslim podcast. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much, Sister Siban. Jazakallah khair for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be here. I am very well, thank you. And yourself?
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thanks again for joining me. I guess it would be great to just start off by asking you who you are. If you're okay to share with our audience a little bit about you.
Sure, my name is Mostafa. I'm from Liverpool. Everybody knows me. I'm born in Bangladesh, came here when I was 9 months old, living in Liverpool since 1978. Long time Liverpool Football Club fan. Sorry, did I say that wrong? Liverpool Football Club fan, yeah. And I'm a pharmacologist, went to Liverpool University 2001. I worked for Apple for 10 years. Went back to study at Cambridge University doing Islamic philosophy. And now I'm studying other things, management, and I'm also doing other projects which will be revealed in course.
Fantastic. It sounds like you've got varied interests and clearly a lot of talent as well that comes with those. So just having spoken to you before the podcast, that's really clear to see. I wondered if you would be able to share some of your experience to do with bereavement, because I know that again before the podcast we had a little chat about that.
Yeah, bereavement is something close to my heart. It shouldn't be the case because it's not something that you want to ever go through. I was 14 when my dad died. Basically an orphan under Quranic law. Very difficult part of my life, and the raw emotion will never go away. I still feel the intense, confused feeling of that night, and it hasn't gone. It deeply affects me still, and no matter how much I don't want to think about it, it's always going to be there. It's part of my life. It's made me who I am today, and it's something that people should talk about, but we don't. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here to actually discuss that situation.
Can you delve a little bit more into that? Do you sort of see the loss of your father as childhood trauma, or in the way that he passed, or can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure, definitely trauma. When a loved one dies of cancer, it really hits you hard 10 times over. It's just something that no child should ever go through, seeing the mom or dad die in front of them. And especially if cancer, it's horrible, and you can't just turn it off like that. Very difficult to actually not think about it. And it's something that's affected me since that time. It doesn't go away. You live with it, you deal with it. And there are different ways of dealing with situations like that.
Can you take us back to that time and some of those feelings, and maybe just put a little context into the situation? So you were 14 at the time, a teenager. Can you tell us some more about whether you had known about your father's illness, or was it sudden?
He wasn't well for a long time, to be fair. He was ill for about 8 months prior to that. In and out of hospital in a wheelchair. Although he was mobile, he just wasn't that bad until probably April, May, and then June when he passed away. We knew he had cancer, bone cancer, absolutely the worst cancer you can go through, and other minor ailments, but it was unexpected. I never thought he was going to go so quickly, and he was very young for his age. He was the most senior of all the uncles, but still, we never thought he was going to go like that. It was a sudden death, you could say. I wasn't prepared for it, and neither was my mum. Actually, nobody was. From that moment on, I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. a lack of direction in my life. There was no vision. There was no mastery in my life, what to do. That's where you need your dad's guidance over above your mum's love. You need both parents, but your dad's guidance sets you on your course for success. And I didn't have that. And it's taken me a very, very long time to get where I am.
So I guess those early stages of grief and the aftermath of losing your father, what was that like for you personally, and then maybe some family members, or was it just you have siblings?
I'm the only one. Okay. So, especially in a foreign country, when you're a boy, you have a lot more responsibility to look after the family. And all my family's back home, they can't help me directly. It was very difficult. A lot of problems in my life started happening, academic issues, social problems, not being able to go out because my mum was in mourning for 3 months and 10 days. I was stuck in the house. I couldn't go anywhere. And this is where you need your friends and family. And to be honest, I was on my own. There wasn't much help. Although to be fair, the support I got was actually from a non-Muslim childhood friend of mine, and I will never forget that because we grew up together.
Amazing. So I guess the help that you mentioned was from a good friend of yours. Were there any other moments that come to mind now in terms of that time and losing your father, and ways that you coped with that loss? Did you just sort of get on, because as a child maybe it's very difficult to really just fathom everything that's happened.
It's overwhelming, yeah. Basically, I would go out on walks, go with my friend. Shopping-wise, that was another problem. Although my mum could drive, she couldn't drive because she was still in mourning. She didn't want to drive. So my next-door neighbor, who's actually an atheist, very good human being, she did a lot for us, driving me all over the place to shops. Never forget that. Same with my my non-Muslim friend. He's actually Hindu. Never ever forget what they did for us. That cannot be thanked enough.
Amazing. And was there any therapy that you had post your father's passing?
Interesting question. I assumed when people die that the NHS would automatically contact bereaved families. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We didn't know that we had to contact the NHS directly, so we probably lost out. At the time, counselling wasn't very well known in terms of a treatment, and it still isn't a very well known source of therapy still, even despite all the facts about famous people having therapy. I just thought, well, the only people who are going to help me really are people who've been in that same situation. And if you're a counselor, you have to go through the same situation to understand that problem. But we didn't have that. Therapy-wise, it was me and my mum. Just doing my salat, that kept me strong. Without my faith, I would have been completely lost.
And any other kind of support systems that you had at the time, or was it very much your faith, your mother, your friends that you mentioned, the neighbor that you mentioned? Were those really the main sources of support for you? Yeah.
And the first 2 or 3 weeks, we did have the old friends coming over. That was very helpful. Some of them talked to me. But as with the situation, once that time goes, you're back on your own 2 feet. You have to deal with it. And people tend to not forget on purpose. But they have their own busy lives, and people just don't talk about that situation anymore. People actually don't mention it anymore. They think that, it was 33 years ago, get over it. No, how would you feel? You've not been through it. None of them have been through it. I was the only one. And mentally, it's actually made me stronger. I've seen things that my peers, my friends have never seen. And I'm going to be controversial here. Most people I know in my community, they would probably not survive that situation. It's very difficult to actually talk to somebody who's been bereaved. And I know a lot of people have been bereaved, and even then it's hard for me to actually go to them and say, can I help you? They might take it the wrong way because they're grieving themselves. And I know what they're going through, but even then it's difficult. So sensitivity is important.
Yeah, yeah. Would that be your advice to somebody that wanted to help as much as they could? So if we have a friend or somebody that's gone through this loss that you've mentioned, especially losing a parent, what do you think the best help would be? The kind of support that we could give each other?
Take your time to actually speak to that person. They may not be forthcoming. They may be angry, not directly at you. They may shout at you, and I have seen it happen, but it's nothing personal. It's just the way that they deal with things. And try to be there for them, and not to say the usual statements like they're in a better place. It doesn't help. It really doesn't. It sounds insensitive, and to be honest, in my situation, I would feel that way. If somebody said, let me know what I can do, and I really mean it, fine. Or sometimes not saying anything is just as good, because what can you say? If you truly mean what you say, then act on it. And that's easier said than done.
I think that's amazing advice, actually, because saying that they're in a better place, I can see how somebody who has really or who's going through that grief, not even just experienced it and then it's gone, but especially when it's so raw, I imagine that it's actually, we say it all the time, but it's actually something that makes a lot of sense. That's something that we should say less. Because you want, you're in that grief, you're in that such a difficult time.
As they say, less is more.
And you're in such pain and sorrow. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen close friends. Actually, one of my close friends, his dad passed away about 3.5 years ago. We saw Uncle the day before he passed away. My friend called me immediately, saying, my dad's taking a turn for the worse. I said, okay, we're coming right over. And my mum was actually crying in front of Uncle, asking for his forgiveness. She didn't do anything wrong. And no one thought that Uncle was going to go. And such a nice man, and very, very respected. And this is my mum who's crying and asking for forgiveness for someone who's about to pass. I mean, if that doesn't touch you, then I don't know what does. I was there, and it was very difficult for me. I've seen other people pass away. I've seen, obviously my dad, I've seen him pass away. I've seen other friends' dads pass away. It doesn't get any easier. It's very, very difficult, even for me, and I've hardened myself in that regard. It is very, very tough.
Mm-hmm. Do you you mentioned faith earlier and how that helped you and sticking to your salah, especially, it sounds like, as well. Were there any other kind of takeaways from Islam that helped you through that difficult period, or even later on in your life? Did you get a chance to maybe explore Islam a little bit more? I know you mentioned your studies as well. Help or solace that you found in the Quran. Were there anything that you can share in that regard?
Sure. I mean, coming from a deeply religious family, Quran Sharif is the foundation of any good Muslim family. And we have to study it and understand it. And that is something we do not do as a Muslim community, I have to say. We read it, but do we know actually what it's saying? One of the most important things is to read Surah Al-Kahf. That's for a lot of reasons. It protected me. Doing my salat also, it kept me in focus. If you don't pray, you're not in focus. Whatever situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never overburden us. We will have to deal with everything as it comes. And the best therapy is to go through all the du'as as much as possible. Understand the Quran Sharif. That's the key thing. And not just read it for the sake of it.
Absolutely. I mean, what comes to mind is not quoting the Quran, but certain verses that acknowledge that we will have losses in our life is what comes to mind for me. Definitely, I think having lost a parent myself as well, that was a huge thing for me in terms of, I can see here in the Quran, like Allah is actually acknowledging this and my pain, and acknowledging that this is what I will go through, and that was amazing for me. So I don't know if that rings true for you as well.
Definitely. There's a lot to learn in the Quran. I'm still learning. I do have some regrets about not following my dad too as much as I could. He was Hafiz and scholar. My mom wanted to be like him. A lot of things happened, but it's there's a lot of things I'm still learning, and it's a good thing. No one's perfect, and if everyone is perfect, you never learn anything.
Absolutely. I guess I want to move on a little bit to a matrimonial service that you started. So can you tell us a little bit more about how that came about and what really prompted you to start the service in the first place?
Great topic, marriage, isn't it? Well, basically, I had this idea in 2015. I thought, well, something's not right. None of my friends are getting married, if any. Certainly in Liverpool. Some of them don't live in cities. That's the problem. They live in a rural area, and it's very difficult for them to attract a good partner. I think most girls would like to live in a city, to be fair. So that's what I've seen. And so I thought, well, why isn't anybody helping our brothers and sisters? Sure, there are great apps out there. Some are better than others. Some are more secure than others. But what are they actually doing? Everything's online, fair enough, but everything's so artificial. It's so artificially inflated. How do you know this person just by looking at them? Oh, great photo. Oh, great video. What else? You have to see the person in person. And I thought, well, if the apps are doing it, I can do it better. But it's been a work in progress. Obviously, with the COVID situation, that didn't help my project. It was on hold for a good number of years. And then my mom finally invested in it by the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She actually had a chat with one niece and her husband. So they said to my mom, yeah, Dadima, uncle is correct. There's a huge demand. But any project is hard to do from the beginning. But she finally gave her blessing, and she said, okay, I'm going to help you. And alhamdulillah, we have a world-class team in Kolkata, in India. So it's in user testing mode. So we are looking at possibly at a January launch. Can't confirm that. Depends on how much user testing is required. It's a world-class website, lots of features which I would love to talk about. And it'll be a premium service.
Alhamdulillah, looking forward to that, inshallah, in the future. Can you tell us a little bit more about what to expect from the service? Anything else that you can share in terms of how it would actually work?
Sure. So, for example, on most sites, not mentioning any in particular, they go through a selfie verification, which just takes your photo, and that just proves who you are. Actually, it doesn't. It only proves where you live. It doesn't prove your ID. Just imagine going to an airport and just giving a selfie just to get on a plane. It's never going to work. You have to go through security. With our system, we actually use airport level technology, airport level security, to ensure that the person you're communicating with is who they say they are. And it's the same technology used in Heathrow Airport, Manchester, and various other organizations. So it's really, really super secure.
I see. Thank you so much for sharing some more about that. We look forward to it. I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts on how Islam plays a role in marriage, and if you could sum that up, that would be really helpful at this point.
Sure. Well, as I think we're all aware, Islam is half the deen, as the proverb goes. I think it was in Surah Al-Baqarah that marriage is mentioned a lot, if I'm not mistaken. And unfortunately, the problem is with the people nowadays. Islam is perfect, Muslims are not. Why aren't people getting married? There's a lot of issues going on. I call it the unsocial media element, has done a lot of damage to it in terms of what people are expecting in a marriage from the boy side and from the girl side. There are a lot of problems, and I don't think our communities are actually helping the situation. Certainly, our masjids are ill-equipped to help people. Not many mosques can actually have a marriage service. There's very few actually. Birmingham Central Mosque is very well known, very successful, but that's one of the only ones that I do know. There are more in London, but we need more.
You've mentioned before that it's difficult to find a partner. So one of the ways that you're trying to solve this is with your service, inshallah. But and the mosques that you mentioned, there are some that will have services as well. But I guess I want to dive into what should we be looking for in our partner.
It's a great question because it's something that we don't look at. We look at certain things: beauty, wealth, piety, the usual stuff. But nowadays, it's just a clinical exercise. Has been for many, many years. Tick, 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 and if you get a red cross, it's out. No one's perfect, and people should not expect perfection. If we're all perfect, we're never going to be content with having a perfect life. You get bored. There's nothing new to learn. So I would say to people, especially students, as soon as you hit 18, go to college or university, start looking for a potential partner because it's going to take time. You have to start early because by the time you're 30, it's going to be very difficult when the pool has narrowed considerably. And by the time you're 40, it's exceedingly difficult to find a quality partner. And we're living in it as a minority within a minority. So we have to take that into account. And I don't think we do.
Sure. So in terms of characteristics that you think would be important to look out for, or red flags even to share, what would you say?
Red flags, that's a good one. There's lots of those. Do you mean in person or online?
More in person, yeah.
The red flag is, one of the red flags are that if somebody's asking somebody out, what do they have in mind? That's difficult to say because nowadays you can't trust anybody really, especially online. In person, you need to get people behind you. Get your family involved. Get your imam involved. If the imam is any good, and not all imams are quality, I have to say, a good imam will do their due diligence. They will try and find out about the other family and then have a meeting. It is very difficult to have in-person meetings nowadays. Everything's online. That's a problem. And it doesn't help. There's a lot of red flags. I think red flags is probably easy to pick up online. Certainly in terms of if somebody's asking for financial assistance, definitely. And that could go for in-person as well.
And what's your opinion on, I don't know if there's a certain notion of asking less questions when we're first meeting somebody or being introduced into somebody, a potential partner. There might be this idea that we're fearful to even ask lots of questions. What's your opinion on that?
It's a good point. If you got lots of questions, I would, because you need to know exactly what that person's going to be about. Are you who you say you are? But not too many questions. Just ask the standard questions. Hi, where are you from? What do you do? And then if you like the person, second meeting. Obviously, in a public area, we always recommend a mahram. But not everybody can have a mahram. But do it in a public area if you're going to meet somebody. Certainly.
I guess the questioning aspect as well is so important when it comes to seeing if your values are aligned, seeing if your vision for your life is aligned with that person as well. And I think possibly also another thing would be if the pace that the relationship is going at, for the families involved, for the potential couple involved as well. Like you say, if they're not sort of willing to introduce their partner to their family, I would think, well, why? If it's not at an early stage in particular.
I come across a lot of stories. I think we've all heard about these horror stories online and in person. If somebody is if a family is asking for an immediate marriage, very quickly, without checking you up, but they know about you, but you don't know about them, but they're asking for a very quick marriage, you've got to be careful. And all too often I've seen people in a situation where they've actually said, oh, we like the girl and all that. They've done immediate marriage and things go wrong. And yeah, be careful, do your due diligence, ask questions which are important, and then you make a decision and do your own investigation.
Absolutely. And I think you said before, there's sort of a balance to be had between asking too much, maybe, but just not asking enough as well about that person, their friends. And I think I'd love to kind of continue our conversation about marriage, because there's so much to talk about. The kind of next thing I'd love to hear your opinion on is the halal way of getting to know a partner. What would be your sort of advice on that, I suppose?
We've touched already. Get your family involved, especially for the sisters. I know a lot of sisters who don't have a mahram. They live alone. It's not their fault. Things happen. So get yourself a good imam, if possible, to actually vouch for you. If not, then get a quality family who you know, and they can help you. Because that way, the wife can see things, and especially the husband will also see things in a different way. Definitely get your family involved, especially for like students. They'll be, I don't like the term dating, it's a horrible term. If you're going to have a halal meet, make sure you've done it properly with your parents. They have to know where you are, where you're going, who you're with. And then make sure you introduce your potential spouse to your family.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice, because I think we sometimes can forget what a big step marriage is, and starting a relationship or families getting to know each other. It's such a momentous moment in life that, I think with the addition of these apps that you've mentioned, it can become just very sort of forgetting just how important it is. Marriage in Islam is like you said, half our deen, just such an integral part of.
Yes, marriage is a 3D situation, as I call it, not like a one-dimensional attribute given to an app. You're not thinking straight. You're just looking at a photo and then, swipe. Look at the person. If you like them, talk to them. Have a video call. That's halal. That's allowed, as long as there's a mahram on a sister's side. That's fine. No issue with that. But yeah, just do things properly. That's what I say.
Absolutely. I guess I'd love to sort of link what we've spoken about before with marriage. So do you think, I do believe that childhood traumas or even just traumatic experiences that we've had previous to us getting married can affect our relationship. Have you experienced that yourself? What is your opinion on that?
It makes it difficult. Obviously, I was very young. This was 1989, so by the time looking for a marriage partner, if you're in a situation like that, if you lost your dad especially, you need a male father figure who's going to take charge of things. Could be an uncle, could be a granddad, could be a brother. But if you're not in that situation, which I was not in, it's very difficult to find a suitable partner. No one's going to help, because once your dad goes, people just don't want to know. It does happen. They just let things be, and then you're on your own. And who do you trust to actually ask for support? It can be very difficult, especially for the girls. If it's a physical abuse, it could be a sexual abuse, it could be abandonment, in the case of one of my close friends. And she can't get married because unfortunately, the Asian family did a lot of damage to her reputation, and her mum, single parent family. They were divorced at a young age, very deeply religious family, and we know them very well. It's very terrible, especially for the women. And then you've got foster care issues and other PTSD trauma-based situations, which nobody should ever go through. And I do come across a lot of that in my field.
One of the other questions I wanted to ask you was, sometimes we might have heard of or experienced even ourselves that we might choose to get married to get away or to escape a certain situation or a certain feeling even. What would you say about that? Do you think that that's a reasonable reason to get married, or should there be a different purpose to marriage?
Marriage is the union of not just two souls but two families. But getting married just for the sake of it, they just don't take marriage seriously. I've come across a lot of people who they're not prepared. I told them, you're not prepared for it. I'm not even a counselor, and I can tell they're not prepared.
So Mustafa, I guess my next question is, can you give me your ultimate purpose of marriage? What would that be to you?
Great question. I think we know what that is. That marriage is half the deen, as the saying goes. However, staying married and getting married and staying married are two different things, especially nowadays with what's going on, social media situations, etc. However, a marriage is about being committed, having trust with each other, and that's the most important thing. Communication is very, very important. About having a beautiful family, having children, strong communities, thriving communities. That's what we want, and it's not happening. Why is it happening? In this country, it's very difficult. We live in a non-Muslim country. It's to be expected, but we are making it very difficult for ourselves, though. Even back home, it's difficult getting married nowadays with a lot of things going on. Social media's done a lot of damage. And it ties into what we said before in the beginning. We make it hard for ourselves. There's just too many problems out there getting in the way of finding a good marriage partner.
I guess if marriages go wrong, and the people involved in that marriage no longer want to stay in that marriage, they choose to have a divorce. What's your sort of take on divorce in general? The kinds of important aspects that you want to highlight here, feel free to do that. In terms of the timing, couples might stay a long time in a marriage when both of them are unhappy, for example. What would you...
That's a huge question, as big as marriage itself. Divorce is happening a lot, unfortunately. In the Western Muslim world, there's a 42% divorce rate. But that's shockingly high, and it's similar to the UK wider population.
Okay.
So you just wonder, why is it happening? Not just with Muslims, but also everywhere else. People are not tolerant. Nowadays, people just get divorced over nothing. Absolutely nothing, and I've seen it. Financial issues, that's a huge one. Trust issues. Divorce in Islam is allowed, but it's also the most discouraged. And whether men give the talaq or women give the hula, we don't actually know what the split is. But it could be 50-50, it could be higher on either side, I don't know. But it's getting a lot higher nowadays. And we need to actually have some strategies in place to minimize that.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess it would be great if you could delve a little bit more in terms of if either side or if one person in that marriage is unhappy, how can they sort of begin to think about and get a better idea of whether this is the decision I need to make. Divorce is right, and that's the road that I'm going to go down.
Get your families involved, definitely. Especially for single women, get your mahram involved. You need somebody who speak on your behalf. Women are going to have much more difficult time of it. People just stay in a marriage just for izzat, for honor. That's not going to help. Because why would you want to stay in a marriage that you're not happy in? If it's a really serious situation, you have to get out of that marriage. You need your escape to victory. You don't want to be staying in that marriage for the sake of it. There's no point. And you're going to harm yourself mentally as well, perhaps physically. So there's a lot of things that should be done. Definitely get your family involved, get your community involved. tell people what has actually been happening. If somebody's saying other things, you definitely need to get the word out.
Do you think divorce is still taboo in the Muslim community?
Not so much nowadays. Um, Years ago, people never used to talk about it, but funnily enough, the Sahaba, they were marrying divorcees. They had no issue. Actually, I think there was a well-known story about there was a divorced woman who would have a difficult choice choosing between men in those days because they were very sought after. Why is there a problem now? Because we make it a problem. People no longer want to stay in a 40-year marriage, and I've seen families split after 40 years of marriage. Very old friends. It's unbelievable. Although, having said that, I mean, my mum and dad got married in 1948. They had one of the longest marriages in the world until 1989, which is, alhamdulillah, incredible. That is a Cinderella fairy tale. It doesn't exist nowadays so much, unfortunately. Lack of tolerance. It's also fair to say, and I'm going to be controversial here, that a lot of our parents also stay together for the sake of the family. Did they really love each other? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't as much. But they stayed together because they couldn't go through a divorce. They tolerated it. But no one's going to tolerate an intolerable marriage nowadays. It's best to get out and get your escapism. You need to get out as soon as possible if you are in a life-threatening situation.
Absolutely. I wonder if our viewers or listeners or would have this view that maybe getting divorced is giving up. Do you think that's a way of thinking about it that's appropriate? Do you think a divorce is giving up?
It would depend on the situation. I think it goes back to the previous point you made, the question that you made. If you're in that marriage and it's not suitable, then you have given up. Because you're not escaping from a life-threatening situation. You have to get out. That is not then if you're not getting out, then you've given up. But if you are in a situation where you need, and that you know you can leave, and then you've got help, then you haven't given up, because that is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are out of that situation. And all too often, I think a lot of sisters don't give the hula because they think it's going to go bad on them. It's just for the izzat, the honor, and they shouldn't think like that.
Yes, like you mentioned, maybe staying in a marriage that you know is toxic or there's abuse going on, getting out as early as possible is
Definitely
is what you'd recommend. And apart from that, we know that Islam says that divorce is allowed. Is there any other light in terms of the Islamic perspective that you wanted to share on divorce?
It's a huge topic. All I can say is, it happens. Unfortunately, a lot of my friends have been through it. Not having a blame culture. You don't want to have a blame culture unless you know the other person's done something critically wrong, and other people have to know about it. And the problem is, having a blame culture doesn't help because you could be at fault as well. But, things happen in life. Things happen in a marriage which go horribly wrong. But just accept that it wasn't meant to be and then move on. Some people can never move on. Men and more women. Men tend to be very reserved, as I think we all know. Stiff upper lip, can't tell the truth. Oh, I'm not going through this. I've got no mental health problems. Anybody who's gone through that sort of situation is going to have that issue. But be open with it. Talk to a counselor, a therapist. It'll do you good.
Absolutely. Going back to some of the problems that we mentioned before in terms of within a marriage, there are always going to be issues that come up, whether it's to do with communication or misunderstandings. Can you give us some advice on or tips on how to solve marital problems? Maybe some general tips on how to solve marital problems when they come up.
Talk about it. Have an open discussion. If you got kids, bring them into the conversation if it's relevant. If it's a monetary issue, it's probably not relevant, and that can have horrendous repercussions. Take your time. 3 to 6 months, if it's a minor thing, shouldn't take that long. But if it's more serious, like, yeah, see a counselor after 3 to 6 months. See a therapist, depending what sort of help you need. Even see an imam if it's a marital issue. Unfortunately, with most imams that I know, they're not equipped for this sort of thing. They're very good at what they do in terms of leading prayers in the mosque, but they're not great at giving pre or post marital support. They need to be trained in that. And it's unbelievable that an imam is not equipped in that regard. So we are letting ourselves down as well. If you can't trust your imam to help you, then who are you going to trust? Ideally, you'd want to see a Muslim counselor or a Muslim therapist. They have the ability to see things the Islamic way. I don't disregard non-Muslim counselors because they can be very, very good, in some ways better, but they don't have that knowledge of Islam to actually delve deep in Quranic readings.
And that lens, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, absolutely. So we've already touched on my second question, which was about counselling and getting that advice for marital problems. But I guess one of the key things I took away from what you just were saying there is listening to each other. So even if the marital problems are daily small arguments or incidents that happen, it's about communicating, and communication is all about listening to each other and trying to see things from the other person's perspective. Would you say that's
Communication is something not all parents are great at it. As I mentioned before, you can tolerate each other. Doesn't mean you're going to love each other. Doesn't mean you're going to communicate with each other. So people have to understand, why is my husband or wife not communicating? Why? Talk to them. You're not giving them the time. That's probably why they're not listening. You've got to take your time and nip it in the bud if it's something very minor. Otherwise, it could just blow out of proportion.
Yes, and lead to resentment.
Definitely. And if they're suffering from, let's say, internal grief from something else, that's going to go on you, because they'll actually push it against you. If they're going through a bereavement, for example, and you're not actually listening, why my partner, my spouse is in a situation and he or she's not listening to me. I'm in a situation, I'm bereaved, they're not helping me. Why?
Yeah, absolutely. Such good advice. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, or your advice rather, really, to youth who are thinking about marriage. We've already touched on this earlier in the conversation, but any other things that you want to highlight to youth who are thinking about marriage?
Start looking early. By the time you're 30, as I mentioned, it's very difficult to find somebody, because by that time the pool has narrowed considerably. It's very difficult to find somebody suitable, a quality person, that is. And that's the best time to find somebody, because you need somebody you can trust. And you may have like-minded hobbies, interests. It's not hard to find somebody, especially in a Muslim community, in a Muslim country, but it's harder here. So you need to start looking earlier and smarter. Not harder, I should say.
What do you mean by smarter?
Don't be too big-headed about getting perfection, because that's not going to work. You're never going to get it. And to be honest, if it was a perfect world, you wouldn't learn anything. Life would be boring. It's nice to have a few arguments in a marriage. Let off steam.
and then resolving those arguments or problems.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's in those issues and those problems that come up and resolving those that you actually do, as you say, learn and grow. You learn more about yourself and your partner, and actually develop as a human being.
And you can actually learn self-counseling skills. You just have to be empathetic.
Absolutely. I'm coming closer to the end of our podcast with you. I guess my final question really was to ask you a little bit more in terms of childhood trauma and how that can come up for us during marriages, and any advice that you'd have for anybody that was thinking about marriage but feeling apprehensive because of what they've gone through in the past. So thinking that actually I have this or had this traumatic experience or experiences, and I'm worried that they're going to show up in my marriage and in my relationships. What would be your advice to those people that are feeling apprehensive?
Don't hide your trauma, because that's the worst thing you can do. With me, I've never hidden it. I'm very, very open about it. Otherwise, people are going to think it never affected me. You've got to be open. You've got to talk to your partner, your husband or your wife, to say, this is the situation I'm having. Pre and post marital coaching. I do a lot of life coaching myself with people. That's really important, and it's something that we need more of. There aren't that many Muslim life coaches, really. It's not a regulated profession, so not unlike in America, but we need more people who can actually deal with these. And there are some very good imams that I know of who can do that, but generally, most people are ill-equipped to actually help our youth of today in terms of that. How much trauma are our youth going through? We don't actually know. They know social media can be useful. It could also be detrimental. I find it very harmful, to be honest, especially with the way things are going in marriage and divorce. And we need to make sure that there are strategies in place to help our next generation. We need to come to speak with them, actually. No one's actually going to universities, ISOCs, saying, this is the situation. I don't think they know what the situation is, to be honest. Perhaps we need more discussion with Islamic societies. Get the youth on board. Why are they suffering? Have you found anybody? Have you had any traumas? Talk about it. And how did you resolve those traumas? Absolutely. We're all coming to a time where everyone's going through a lot of issues with social media, mental health issues. How many of us actually suffering from mental health issues? Probably most of us. But it's how you deal with it. But how are we dealing with it?
Well, Jazakallah khair, Mustafa. It's been such a brilliant conversation. I really appreciate all of your knowledge that you shared with us today. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah for having me. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Mindful Muslim podcast. I hope you found this one an interesting and useful episode. And inshallah, I will see you on the next one.